Hello, John Barnwell here, and very soon I hope we'll have Reverend David show up. Quite a fascinating individual from across the pond over in the UK, in the city of London. And I think that between the two of us, we can frame some interesting ideas to try and give people food for thought so that they can at least improve their questions. And consequently, I hope that there isn't a confusion on the time zone, but I went on and I checked up what time it should be in London right now. So David should be with us, but if not, we'll just continue on. David is the author of a very interesting book, Mount Athos Inside Me, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts. And it's been quite critically acclaimed by those in the scholarly world of literature, and it has gotten quite remarkable reviews. And in my mind, it's very, very easy to understand because in reading David's post or his essays and articles and listening to him speak, he has such a firm grasp on the English language. David happens to be a playwright also and a poet, and he's written a couple of other books, but we're going to be focusing more on the subject matter of his book, Mount Athos Inside Me. Those of you that want to find it, of course, you can find it on the usual places like Amazon, even though I have to take it aback by recommending that just because of its shadowy nature. But anyways, I'm going to be listing the links for his books. They're already listed below on the YouTube podcast of this. And it's also included with my books, The Arcana of Grail Angel, Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and to the true Rosicrucian Order. And the sequel to that is The Arcana of Light on the Path, which is more of a meditative tool. Both of my books are available on eBay, and as I frequently recommend, don't look for them on Amazon because opportunists have had copies recently for as high as $1,000. Anyways, getting back to David's book and his writings in particular, he has a particular gift with the English language to be able to write a fluid language and has such a firm grasp of the language itself and of the various idioms of the language. So that consequently, he's a kind of a rare bird in this postmodern era that we're dwelling in, where everybody's dealing so much with truncated language and mimetic structures. Consequently, the dangers of mimetic structures or memes is that one might not necessarily have sufficient content to make it a meaningful meme. And that's the challenge in this modern era of falsehood politics and falsehood journalism. So much has gone on that's been revealed that the actual ratings of the mass media super structure, their actual ratings have fallen so far in the United States. Of course, in places like the UK, where there's more of a monolithic uh, function of the BBC, which is right in there with the whole nest of globalists, the true source of globalism is out of that British climate. And we've explored that so far in depth that it's unquestionable over at American Intelligence Media and Americans for Innovation. And so consequently, as I've shared with you time and time again, and I keep reiterating that the people that consider the intelligence services to have infiltrated mass media, they're looking through the wrong end of the telescope, but actually coming out of the Imperial Press Conference in 1909 in London, where there was over 650 journalists all present, where they attempt to come up with the way of staying on top of the narrative and being able to direct public opinion through the media conglomerates. And at that time, it was financed by the Burroughs Wellcome Trust, or the Burroughs Wellcome Chemical / pharmaceutical company, now known as GlaxoSmithKline. And so, relevant to today's events, we're seeing so much unfolding with the authoritarian structures of the medical community. And so consequently, it's interesting in that one of the worst victims of an era such as the one we live is truth. And so I thought it would be a nice touch to get into a conversation with Reverend David William Parry today regarding what is truth. And I listed it as part one because I think this is quite a vast subject, and I hope that we can get into it and look under the hood and try to figure out if many of the thought structures that people work with have any validity. Again, Rudolf Steiner has often made the point, and I imagine I should make it now, that when individuals come up with a grand scheme, so to speak, for the way to solve human problems in government and economics and so forth. He made the point that the idea would remain in existence only to the extent that it was based on truth. And so consequently, you see, like, for example, the Soviet system that crumbled after around 70 years, which is interesting because 10 years before that happened, I had announced on the radio here in Detroit, on the largest radio station at that time, that I predicted the fall of the Iron Curtain in 10 years, and that was in 1981, and we could see what happened 10 years later with the Iron Curtain coming down and people coming to the opinion that they had defeated communism. And essentially, perhaps that's more true if you're a Russian, but as far as the whole concept of communism as developed out of the ideas of Karl Marx while he was in London, by the way, seems many interesting things in this modern era come out of the city of London. But Karl Marx himself had great reservations regarding that system of what has come to be known as Marxism. And ultimately, that system did fail in the Soviet Union because why? Because it wasn't, in my mind, and in according to the idea I shared with you for Rudolf Steiner, that it did not truly represent the ideas that would be harmonious with the true nature of man, so that because it was put into a system by an individual that didn't even understand what a human being was, it was essentially doomed to failure. I suspect that the same type of result will be the result with the Chinese system, and so I feel that they won't even make it that far. So, anyways, in developing this further, one of the interesting aspects of David's writing is that he understands the significance of how things become more effective if one has a grasp of the language and making it a real expression of literary form and expression of the genius of language, so to speak. And consequently, his his books and writings are beautifully written so that it's a pleasurable experience. And I found that this is something that's been lost in the modern era, and consequently, uh, although there are people that are finding it because of the way in which they use the internet, nonetheless, the literary culture, as far as being something of a broader scope, has declined greatly, and the language skills that we can see in younger students and all of that, and them only be able to come up with keywords and basically sloganism, which, as Rudolf Steiner has so clearly expressed in the lecture cycle on imperialism that I covered with Douglas Gabriel recently on this channel, and that this idea of sloganisms as a means for putting forth ideas of power and control. So, consequently, many people are supporting ideas that, were they patient enough to actually think it through, they would see that their idea is it falls far short of being able to bring about the type of result that they think they would get. And you could say that, well, you're just saying that as some kind of abstract, arbitrary assertion, but all you have to do is look around the world. Just take the one concept of socialism and try and show me one nation around the world that has effectively utilized it as a system. It continually fails because it doesn't take into account human nature. The idealism that's expressed by socialism is not something that is held truly by contemporary humanity. Humanity at this stage of the game in their development is uh, still caught up in self-interest to too great of an extent to be able to serve something that posits itself to be some kind of sacrificing system. Whereas when humanity's consciousness evolves further into the future, quite quite further, uh, just by their own nature, will intuitively move towards wanting to have that kind of a sharing, egalitarian view of things. But at this current stage of the game, I'm firmly of the opinion, as a cultural historian, that the American system, with all of its flaws, nonetheless has a system of checks and balances that are capable of maintaining a structure that is, if not dismantled, and mind you, we're going through a great deal of deconstruction in this era right now that we can see, but nonetheless, there's meant to be the balance of power between the three principal branches of government, so that consequently, through these checks and balances, we can prevent individuals from gathering too much power into their personal hands. And so consequently, uh, that serves to protect mankind from their own inclinations. I'm taking a peek here to see if there's a word from David, as it's unfortunate that there's no reply. Perhaps there's some kind of power outage. We were going through power outages here in Michigan, and I was thinking, oh, great. That'd be nice, get a power outage, get the demons of electricity chasing you around and pulling the plug. Anyways, that's okay, because there's a lot of ideas that I could share with you that would only add to any conversation that will happen once David does get here. And I've just been digging through the files and trying to find concepts that would frame what I wish to get at in this conversation with David. Of course, one of my favorite quotes that really does cover it is the often repeated quotation by Lord Acton, Lord Dalberg Acton, actually. And he says, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are almost always bad men, even when they exercise influence and not authority. Still more when you superadd the tendency of the certainty of corruption by authority. So you see that here's a man who was a lord in England, and he was, by the way, Catholic, which is pretty unusual to have a title in England and be Catholic, but nonetheless, he was a Catholic that was very much aware of what was going on within the walls, the corridors of power, shall we say. And so consequently, if anybody would know, he would. And why would that be so? Well, if you look at the history of the relationship between the United States and Britain, going back to the colonial era, you'll see that there's this tendency for the British Empire to maintain the hold on power through the developing of corporations. So consequently, what we're under right now is, although many people are unaware of it, we are essentially beneath the corporatist system, which technically could be, or is classically called, fascism, according to the definition given to fascism by Mussolini, who was really the one responsible for bringing that concept forward, because Mussolini was backed by large corporations, and at the time it was thought expedient in Italy to reestablish order through the assertion of authoritarian government of a dictator, and he was backed by the corporate interests in Italy. But he thought of himself and was celebrated as a socialist. So there you see socialism, dictatorship brought about through corporate authority. And so that, I guess what I want to say is, if you want to get to the truth behind these things, you have to be able to understand what the terms mean. And there's frequent confusion, as I've mentioned on my podcast with Douglas, that there's a frequent confusion or obscuration that occurs when you attempt to use these terms, and people will frequently confuse the concepts of government and economics, and think of an economic system like communism or socialism, or of course what we have going here in America. capitalism. But these whole ideas that are so to speak belief systems or isms tend to be a means to get things into a box. And it's oftentimes the case that you need to think out of the box. And consequently, when you do this, it's often inspirational to look to leading figures in history that have been able to do that, because they're the ones that led culture forward. And like I often quote Samuel Pepys, who said, "Culture is that which remains after you've forgotten what you set out to do." So consequently, what is culture? And what is the truth of culture? And how does that come about? And how is society affected through the replacements of culture, such as have been done in the past through authoritarian systems? Because all you have to do is look at the Cultural Revolution in Japan, where the youths ran around and destroyed cultural artifacts, which is like what's going on here in the United States with the destruction even of statues of Abraham Lincoln, who basically got a bullet in the head for working toward eliminating slavery, and of course for trying to break free of the hold of the oligarchs centered in the city of London. And this is a part of history many people are not apprised of, but that's okay. But consequently, so they're tearing down Abraham Lincoln on behalf of BLM. So that just shows you the extent that truth is being obscured in the current narrative. So that what you have is basically falsehood politics and falsehood economics being supported by falsehood media. And so consequently, what's been rising and is to such great effect is the kind of democratization or the ability of individuals taking up the banner and being able to contribute to the narrative. So that consequently, the hold that the media's had on what we might call the meta narrative, the great narrative, that the hold that's been held by mass media since the Imperial Press Conference has been shattered to a great degree. And consequently, you'll find people that have channels on YouTube have more viewers than so-called pundits on television. So that's a good thing. But nonetheless, within the midst of all that, there could be a great deal of confusion. And consequently, this would lead us to an area where there's a lot of wiggle room as regards to the truth, because when you start approaching the word truth or veritas, then you'll see that it's something that, to the extent that you can bring yourself in relation to the truth, is the extent to which you're going to be entering into being a universal human being. And here's David Parry himself, except he seems to not be able to function without a window behind him that totally obliterates the picture.
Sorry, John. I'm just a pastor. I'm just.
It makes you look like an angel with a halo. It's okay. It's to be expected. I figured out you're actually Irish.
You know, that's strange you say that. If you go back to my great-great-grandparents on both sides, they're all Irish. Someone came up to me years back, a nun, and said, "That's such an Irish face," looking at me, and I didn't know what to say back at all. So guilty on all counts. There we are.
You didn't know whether it was a compliment or an insult.
In this city, you never know. In this city, you never know. You're looking well yourself, John. You're looking well yourself.
I feel good, especially I've been looking forward to this so much, really.
Oh, likewise.
I've been sitting here tooting your horn as your membership in the company of the literati and
Oh
being a
gosh.
playwright, poet, and I hadn't even got to so many of your other adventures within in your pursuits. I mean, geez, you founded 5 churches in Africa.
Yeah.
I mean, you're the only person I can think of that I know that I speak to that's done that. So that's
No.
that in and of itself, and then your work regarding efforts, cultural efforts in Central Asia, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another area, and then you go down to the Mediterranean and the beauty of Mount Athos
Yeah.
and your ability to bring clarity to things that are often lying in obscurity. And
God.
so I can't recommend your book highly enough, because I think that what people need at this stage is an antidote to all the pseudo-culture that's been so pervasive in mass media. And it's like it's like sub-artistic. It's formulaic. It's corporate. It's not human. And so consequently, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Wow, actually, I'm just about to betray my aesthetic credentials because someone's trying to drag me into a commercial project. I used to be a very good friend of Cyrus Yavner, who, of course, was a big Hollywood producer. I'm sort of loosely linked with the Jewish mafia in Hollywood. So, God, they'll probably kill me if they know I've said that. He was an amazing man. He was the original producer for 24 with Kiefer Sutherland. He did, what was that thing going around recently? Supernatural. He's got some very, very big credits. Sadly, he passed on a year or so ago, a few years back. He was a dear friend to myself and Alan Cox. And it struck me, you do, John. I mean, you've got a background. You're an extraordinary guy yourself. I mean, you're a cultural historian. You're a pundit. You're the only conspiracy theorist. Take that in the most respectful sense that I listen to. I tend not to listen to most of the others because there's some good stuff linked in with some strange stuff. I think you're accurate. You're precise. You're clinical in your grasp of the undercurrents of culture and science. I mean, and the Cat Project is incredible. I mean, you've got me absolutely hooked with that. But yeah, yeah,
Meow.
the power of the cat is with us. Oh my God,
that was a gift from Dr. Fisher, the Egyptologist. Brought it back from Egypt for me.
Wow.
Little statue of Bast, the Egyptian cat god. So I thought that's interesting. Cat, by the way, for those of you that don't know, it's the cat reports that come out of American Intelligence Media. Cat being citizens addicted to truth. And so that's fitting in context of today's show. What is truth? So tell me, David, what is truth?
Oh gosh, I mean, I'm just a short, fat pastor. What would I know? What is truth? Truth is God. Truth is self. Truth is knowledge. Truth is love. I discovered Kierkegaard at university, maybe a bit before university, who hated questions like that, but wrote a lot about them. I mean, truth. Kierkegaard is full of ironies. He wanted to show that Jesus Christ was a unique figure, so he compared him to Socrates. Well, that must be an irony. Socrates had a daimon, so there were celestial voices guiding Socrates. He committed sacrifice, self-sacrifice. He gave up his life for his friends. And he was a purveyor of great wisdom. So there must be an irony in that. But I think underneath Kierkegaard's question was, well, what if anything, what separates Jesus Christ from, say, Mahatma Gandhi, from Socrates, and from other wisdom teachers? And I think the answer for Kierkegaard is truth is life. Truth is the way we choose to live. It's not simply a series of assertions. It's not simply, a list of facts that we have to check off. I mean, with deep respect to my brothers and sisters in Southern Baptism, some of the things ordinands have to go through. There's a massive checklist in certain churches where you have to go into the fine minutiae of doctrine. I mean, that can't be right. Are you a loving person? Are you seeking the good, the beautiful, and the true in your life? Are you guiding your congregation in a likewise manner? I mean, so what is truth? When Jesus says he is the truth, the way, and the life, I don't think he's talking about one assertion amongst other assertions. I think he's talking about a way of being, authenticity, honesty, clarity, depth. Those are all things to do with truth when it has a capital T. Of course, it's truth with a capital T that's out of fashion at the moment. One can have tiny truths, mostly irrelevant, trivial truths, but truth with a capital T is shunned nowadays. And why? Because you very soon end up with metaphysics, which of course the present academy doesn't like, but I rather like. I like reading about it, I like discussing it, and I know you do. And, without that compass, without that point of reference, we really start drifting away into very dangerous territories indeed. And very, very quickly, tolerance becomes relativism. And then relativism very, very soon unpacks into anything goes, which sounds okay on the surface. But if, a dear friend of mine, a mutual friend of ours, Leo Zagami, would hate this story. I was told by a Jesuit friend of mine yesterday night that somebody drove into a Catholic church. I can't remember what part of America, all guns blazing, and set the place afire. So because it's now a symbol of oppression, it's without truth with a capital T. All of these things very quickly make themselves palatable, and we're on very dangerous ground indeed because we forget all the other things that human beings are. That what a rambly answer. Have I said anything worth listening to there, John? Or is that an old pastor rambling? What do you think?
Well, I always like the quote by one of my spiritual mentors, so to speak, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who said, "Wisdom lies solely in truth."
Yeah.
So consequently, I mean, if you know anything about Goethe, the depth of sincerity with which he's proclaiming that, because wisdom, that's like the beingness of wisdom is Sophia, consequently, which is so revered at Mount Athos, which again ties into your wonderful book. And I think that there are a great many people involved on both sides of the aisle, as we say here in America, having to do with their sincerity of intent. And so consequently, it's difficult to be delicate with these people because when they start to embrace ideas that sound good but aren't true. And that's where we're at with this, because fundamentally, for me, being an American, I happen to think that the founding documents of the United States of America happen to be inspired, and because of the checks and balances that truly, shall we say, truly followed, although they seem to be side skirting it and trying to overthrow it as we speak. But if one looks at the system of checks and balances, they prevent the acquisition of power by too few individuals. And that I think is the real challenge, because the great vulnerability in mankind is the acquisition of truth. In other words, well, hey, what's going on? And so consequently, we have so many veils of black projects and obscurity, and people had any idea how intermingled the United States is with the power structure in Britain, they would be astonished. Likewise, interwoven with the power structure in the Vatican, in Rome, that Leo is the most knowledgeable person on that subject as far as the power structures. And so consequently, there's all these tin horn dictator wannabes. And they're out there and they're working the system in an effort to gain power and money or protection from blackmail, or there's any number of reasons why they might be functionaries in the way that they're acting these days. And so consequently, we're in a real climax here, climacteric even, to where people are going to have to wake up, strive to embrace truth. And if we're going to rescue what is a constitutional republic, which has been contaminated by the thought form of spreading democracy around the world. We're not a democracy. Hello? We're not. That's like mob rule. And so that's not that the founding fathers feared democracy as much as they feared monarchy, as they feared corporations, you know. So consequently, the system that they set up was meant to protect us from that kind of a system, to where 51% can vote to have the other 49% pay their way. So consequently, and I know you tend to you posit yourself to be liberal, but what does liberal mean? I mean, Thomas Jefferson in his era was considered liberal. Now today, liberal is like somebody who's going to give you more free stuff, like Bernie Sanders. You know, so it's like people, instead of the liberalism of which you are so conversed is, which has to do with altruistic motives, the distorted vision of that becomes more free stuff and self-interest. You know, so consequently, it becomes a vanity project.
Well, I think liberal. I mean, I completely agree with everything you've said there. I'm in terms of me, a European, I'm a constitution worshipper. It astonishes me that a country as great and as historically significant as America is sometimes so slow to see the great treasures it's been given. The Constitution being, to my mind, the greatest treasure. I don't know where that puts me as a Brit, apart from the fact we need a written constitution, which I've been saying for years, along with other libertarians. I mean, over here, I tend to be better known as a libertarian or classic liberal rather than the sort of modern liberal. I mean, the neoliberal agenda is acidic across the world. It's demonic in so many ways.
Yeah, it's like...
Yeah, I mean, it's bewildering that people buy into it to the extent that they do. And I thought Bernie Sanders said he was a socialist, but I'm only a Briton.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting concept in and of itself, because when you start looking under the hood of all that, and you see the corruption that his wife was involved with the university, and they got called on the rug about dirty dealings of finances. And now that he's a multimillionaire, he used to say a millionaire should we got to get the money of the millionaires. And now that he's one of them, then he moved the bar, So consequently, I just don't feel he's sincere as much as he can, because again, the attribute of given that happens when somebody like him is given the opportunity to access power,
Yep.
It's like it's so funny in essence. Like James Garfield, President Garfield said, now more than ever, people are responsible for the character of their Congress. If that body be ignorant, reckless, and corrupt, it's because the people tolerate ignorance, recklessness, and corruption. I mean, it's really that simple. And so,
I'll tell you an irony, which I think will horrify you and delight you at the same time. Because of my work over in that direction, sort of Russia / Central Asia, my Russian friends have been teasing me for the last couple of years that Britain is now the new Soviet Union, and they're getting free. And now it's hard to argue with them after recent events because it's all coming true.
Yeah, when the police come in and pull somebody out of their house because of some Facebook post they did, it's like, what's up with that? Really. And so consequently, for me, again, like I was discussing with the listeners before you arrived here, it has to do with so much of what's covered in your books, because one of the central themes of your book is Emanuel Swedenborg, who lived from 1688 to 1770, 1772 was it? And here is one of the most brilliant minds. In fact, there was a study that was done here in the States at Stanford University by Professor Louis Terman. And he's the guy who developed the modern tests for IQ, right? So when his researchers tried to calculate the IQ of historical figures, the greatest minds, and they used the Terman standard intelligence test, it's like... it's a huge database that they work with, and there were only 3 people that scored above 200. Swedenborg, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, and John Stuart Mill.
Oh, wow!
Who's one of my heroes?
A great man, man.
And you look at him, and he was really one of the key figures for women's suffrage, and his book On Liberty is really one of the greatest testaments to what do we mean when we say liberty. And see, he had all 3 of these men had scientific minds. Emanuel Swedenborg was one of the greatest scientific figures of his day, as was Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Goethe was a member of over 100 international scientific societies, likewise Swedenborg. And it used to show up in the newspapers when one of them would show up somewhere. Swedenborg was here today, and he visited so-and-so. I mean, they were that important of a figure. And so consequently, when you get into looking at that more closely, you can see that throughout history, there are waves of culture. And the leading edge really, in my mind, is music. But music and the arts, because going back to the quote I frequently give, and I gave at the beginning here, culture is that which remains after you've forgotten what you set out to do, by good old Samuel Pepys, who was a genius in his own right, big head of the Admiralty, and he never even served in the Navy, and he totally reorganized the British Navy. So there are some pretty smart people that have come before us. We have to be able to avail ourselves of their gifts without prejudice, because some of them, they have some good ideas about some things, and then they have some not so good ideas. So consequently, there's a lot of sifting that has to go on, but people tend to want to go, oh, I don't listen to him. He's a blank, fill in the blank. He's a such and such. And consequently, this whole label scenario that people are really getting sucked into on both sides. And so consequently, for me, I don't even endorse people. I mean, I might consider endorsing you, but see, people always are going to disappoint you, because Right when you come to the point where you go, I endorse this guy, he's great. He goes around and does something that's totally against everything you stand for. So consequently, I fully endorse Jesus Christ, and everybody else stand in line, right?
Yeah.
Because he seems to be the only one who got it right all the time in my mind. But,
Amen.
So consequently, but John Stuart Mill, what are your thoughts on him?
Gosh, I remember, I've read most of the sort of liberal classics. I remember, God, I think I was in my early 20s when I read On Liberty, and it blew me away then. It still blows me away now. I mean, he covers everything, including why there's a necessity to the nation state. And, and not just because it makes people lots of money. I mean, there are real reasons behind that, and including his attitude. My dear young colleague, Daniele Irandust, who is the founder and curator of TEDx Lambeth, read him recently and reminded me of something I hadn't thought about for years. John Stuart Mill's advice about recalcitrants: you take out a whip and you give them a good whipping, because not everybody wants to see sense. And I thought it's meant to be funny and it's meant to be ironic, but it's completely forgotten that. And it's true to human nature. We're capable of great and lofty things, but is that really the sort of psychic space everybody's coming from? And the bold and rather depressing reality is, no, it's not all the time. I'm totally against all this statue pulling down that's happening at the moment. I'm completely against iconoclasm for one reason. It can't, nothing like that. There are waves. I mean, anyone, I know you know all this, John. Anyone that's looked at human history knows there are waves of iconoclasm from time to time. It's nearly periodic. And to a certain extent, it's the new ushering in new ways of thought and activity, getting rid of the old skin, getting rid of the old coating, as it were. But my trouble with that is not that some of these statues shouldn't come down. If there's a statue to a slave trader, yeah, bring it down. But it has to be done in a certain way. It can't be one section of the community dictating to other sections of the community without consultation, which of course John Stuart Mill would thoroughly have agreed with. We're all in this together. Otherwise, the sense of offence and the sense of hurt simply continues in a different form. No, John Stuart Mill's a giant of a man, and certainly he was the main reason I could never go along with liberal democratic thinking in this country, which is the closest to the Democrats in your neck of the woods, I think, because it just didn't ring true. In the recent Brexit debacle over here, I went very, very quiet. So we've gone from putting down statues to Brexit, but there we are. Because the only thing that wasn't talked about was liberty. So what are we actually doing? Right, so there are new types of economic arrangements. A group of gangsters in Westminster has fallen out with a group of gangsters in Brussels. Hey, but they're all still gangsters. And not a single person is mentioned freedom or liberty or increased citizen rights. Not a single one of them. And everybody was staring at me, although I just got off a spaceship or something and hadn't kept up with the discussion. And now, sadly, I'm proving to be correct. And isn't it great isn't it horrible rather when you prove to be correct and you don't want to be proved correct? So now we're going from debacle and crisis into further debacle and crisis. The best thing, and forgive me, everybody, I'm not making light of the COVID-19 crisis, but the best thing politically to happen to the elite in this country is the COVID-19 crisis, because they can hide all of their dirty laundry behind medical emergencies. Brexit has disappeared from public discourse, and if it ever surfaces again, well, what could we do? What could we do? We're in the middle of a pandemic. We can't focus on that. And you end up thinking, my God. And it's exactly what people like John Stuart Mill, him in particular, reminded us. keep an eye on your politicians. Some of them are wonderful. Most of them are just in it for the profession. And some of them are, what's that old-fashioned word, John? Some of them are just bounders. Some of them just don't care at all. They want to line their own pockets. And, it's not wise pretending that those people aren't there. No, vive la America, vive la America, vive la Constitution. America, listen to me. Listen to the old pastor. Don't throw away your treasures, because that is America is that country that inspired the world once. And if it started doing that again, I'd be happy. And what were the things that inspired everybody? The Statue of Liberty, and the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution. These are wonderful things. People have equal worth. People have equal say. There is no monarch. They all get elected, and if you don't like them, you can have another election. These are extraordinary acts of human progress, and I can't tell you how depressed I am, and certain sections of Britain are, that everything that John Stuart Mill wanted and people like me want seem to be on the verge of being thrown away for no good reason. It's absolutely bewildering to me. I don't know what you think about that, John.
Well, it brings to mind a quotation of Rudolf Steiner that I've shared on more than one occasion, but I share it because it's so important, because I'm finding amongst his followers people that are like what you're describing. You can't believe that they're buying into the narrative. And so consequently, we have to go back to 1906 in Hamburg on the March 3rd. Rudolf Steiner said, anyone who wants to become an esoteric in the theosophical sense must train his thought life so that every thought is thought through sufficiently. Short thinking is the sign of a materialist. Theosophical esoterics must not fall into comfortable thinking. Take the thought of social democracy. Change the circumstances and a man will have a better living and working conditions. That's a belief of materialism, short and deceiving. This belief is very paralyzing for every study of social life. Now, how can a theosophist free himself from this materialistic belief that existence and even morality would improve if one would just improve outer conditions? Let's begin with the reflection that every change has to be made by human beings, and therefore every condition that's brought about for the social order arises from human thoughts and feelings. Once one has this thought firmly in mind, one can free oneself from the materialistic view that everything is brought about by external conditions. And so you have that concept that I used to hang out with a lot of gurus because I thought they were interesting, and they were nice to me, although I wasn't a guru worshiper, and I kind of set them back because when I tell them I was a Christian. But nonetheless, Yogananda, who was one of the principal ones that came here, who considered himself to be a reincarnation of William the Conqueror, by the way, which is But anyways, he said that that governments are projections of the consciousness of the people. And so if you have a stupid government, that's because you have stupid people, that they're not willing to put the time and energy into it in a way that's going to get the result that they're looking for. And Rudolf Steiner said one of the failings of government and economics and the social life in general is that they're not, as they're expressed in the world, they're not true reflections of what a human being is. And for something to have a lasting value, it must accurately reflect that which it's meant to represent. And so consequently, I think part of the strength of the American system, at least it has three branches of government, because we know that a human being is threefold in thinking, feeling, and will. But nonetheless, it doesn't get to the point that Rudolf Steiner was trying to articulate with the threefold social order, where he talked about the autonomy of the three spheres that are represented by the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And so consequently, this is the challenge for modern time, is to be able to accommodate the growth of understanding. And anybody who's studied the scientific method knows that the scientific method is based on failure. That in order for you to be able to come to the truth, you have to be capable of entertaining conflicting ideas. So consequently, the permission of falsehood. You have to permit falsehood because, hey, what if you're wrong? What if it's not a falsehood? What if it's actually the truth? But you have not allowed it. And so consequently, you get into the dialogue with what are called the neo-Marxists that here in the States have commandeered the universities and colleges under the ideas of this postmodernist neo-Marxism. And you have one of their leading representative, Herbert Marcuse. And here's a book.
Wow.
True tolerance. Like, is it proper to tolerate people saying things that you don't like? And I mean, really? Then one could even have that conversation. It's like, what? I mean, how manipulative do you have to be to attempt to craft ideas that are so disingenuous as the cultural Marxists? When you read them, it's just like it's like really looking into a basket of snakes. Really, I'm sorry, but that's the feeling I get. It all goes into pure granulation. Nothing's connected. Everything is like this demonic soup of we're gonna get you. We're gonna get you.
Horribly graphic image.
It's a horribly graphic image because it's a horribly graphic prospect, and you look at it and you say, okay, well, who does that represent in modern life? And you go, well, the neocons are a good example. And you go, what? Are they Republican? Well, no, not really. That what they are is an organization that aligns themselves with whoever has the power. See? And so you have like a character like John Bolton, for example, who's a neocon. He just wants to go to war with everybody, make tons of money, These people, career politicians that want to work in government and then leverage that into really high position in either a pharmaceutical company or a military, industrial, something or other. It's just pure self-interest. And so what do you call self-interest? That's Luciferic. Basically. And so everybody wants to know, who's the Luciferians? Oh, it's the people that want to take your stuff and control it. That's a Luciferian. He wants to be in charge. He wants to be the big guy. And so consequently, the dark satanic mills that was so ably expressed by our friend. I'm sure he's one of your big influences. It's consequently, this has been something looming that has come out of the industrial age, so that along with these developments that have the capacity to help mankind, it has further accommodated decentralization of power.
Oh, I mean, William Blake is forever. William Blake is forever. I mean, he upper working class, lower middle class. In other words, in Britain, in the UK, the class which does everything. If you're beneath that, you're too oppressed to do anything, and if you're above that, you're too well-heeled and lazy to do anything. So that tends to be where all the thought and innovation comes from. Not every single bit of it, but a fair amount of it. Actually, one of my noble ancestors wrote the music to Jerusalem with William Blake's words, and did those feat in ancient times and all that sort of stuff. So I'm very proud of that. Beautiful, beautiful song.
And can you name what was his name?
Say again, John. Oh, Sir Hubert Parry.
Yes,
Sir Hubert Parry. Yeah.
I recall.
So I'm so I'm truly intimidated by having giant footsteps to walk in before me. So oh gosh, you've said huge things. You said huge things there.
Yeah,
I
I think.
went to. I'll just give one story because I think you'll like it. I went to a conference years and years back when I was a young cub walking around London, new to the big city, and finding its architecture so violent. Walls of glass and chrome in the big banks. So of course the impression which they still give is we're us and you're you, and no, you don't fit here, and no, you don't have any power, and you don't have any money, and we control you. I mean, one morning or afternoon walking around Canary Wharf in this city, and you'll be very, very clear that you are powerless and you're a pawn in these corporations' claws. But as a cure to that, I went to a day's conference on Antonio Gramsci, who, of course, was the founder of Eurocommunism. As I was reminded the whole of the day by various pundits, a Marxist-Leninist to the core. I'm not quite sure what that was meant to mean. But what if there was a cure to anybody joining Eurocommunism as an idea? It was attending the conference that day. There was some old actor at the beginning who gave a wonderful performance as Antonio Gramsci. So I loved that bit. That was good. And the rest of the day was one gigantic argument. Every room you went into, everybody was arguing with everybody. And I came away thinking, oh my God, so that's Eurocommunism then. Who on earth would want to get involved with that?
Yeah,
And this whole Marxist-Leninist narrative that's around at the moment forgets the realities. Let's look at what's happened in communist China. Let's look at what happened in communist Russia. It's all been tried, and sadly, it's not worked. We need better solutions than that.
yeah. Again, Rudolf Steiner does such a good job of getting to the point, and
Yeah.
his it's been published as From Symptom to Reality in Modern History, and this is from Lecture 6, which was given in Dornach, Switzerland on October 27th, 1918. But he says, now it is interesting to note that in these socialist circles, one thing that is of capital importance for our epoch and for the understanding of this epoch was taboo. I could speak on any subject, for when one speaks factually, one could speak today, leaving aside the proletarian prejudice, on any and every subject, save that of freedom. To speak of freedom seemed extremely dangerous. I had only a single follower who always supported me whenever I delivered my libertarian tirades, as the others were pleased to call them. It was the Pole Siegfried Nacht. I do not know what has become of him. He always supported me in my defense of freedom against the totalitarian program of socialism. Unquote. So there you have it. I mean, that says it right there. It's like, in order for them to be able to put forward these ideas, they have to squelch freedom. Because if they give you the opportunity to actually evaluate what they're planning on doing, you're not going to go along with it. So they have to destroy. It's this crash and burn way of doing things, because there is no substance to what they're putting forward. Really.
Oh, yeah. I mean, debate has gone. Debate has gone, John. You and I are having a debate, but even in modern British politics, I mean, it's posturing. I mean, Parliament nowadays are two gangs of adolescents posturing, but not really. Are they there to solve anything or govern? I mean, I was on Alan Cox's show this morning, and unfortunately broke into a rant. I'm becoming something of the ranter parson on Alan Cox's show, which I don't really want to do, because at the end of the day, sure, is Boris Johnson Winston Churchill? No, because how do we know that? When there was a crisis, Churchill didn't simply make good speeches. he was rallying the country together and trying to lift everybody's confidence and talking about the future, as opposed to Boris Johnson's rather strange and bewildering government giving contradictory advice day in and day out about what we're going through, and speaking down to people. We need debate back, John. We need good old-fashioned debate back with a couple of people who know how to debate and some ideas that need exploring.
Yeah, where are the Emanuel Swedenborgs,
Oh, wow.
Johann von Goethe's, and John Stuart Mills when you need them? I mean,
well,
it's interesting though that you bring up Prime Minister, because we share two things in common. New Yorker, they're both New Yorkers. President Trump's a New Yorker, and so is your Prime Minister. And they both have the most unusual haircuts, which is interesting. But nonetheless, the whole idea of being able to bring about something that is really populist, but really populist. What we're talking about, I think, when the modern person says populist, it has to do with a burgeoning middle class. That and what the elites want is they want to create this big, huge gulf between them, the elites, and then everybody else that's like the peons, your common people, so to speak. And the real strength of what the American idea was capable of bringing about was a true middle class. And that is something that's very, very unique. And that's one of the reasons why so few, what you would call in America here, conservatives get into politics, because they don't aspire to be bureaucrats or politicians. I mean, really. It's like the people that aspire to go work on some, the Ford Foundation or whatever, they went to the Frankfurt School of Marxist, neo-Marxist economics. They nothing they'd like better to go work on some foundation, and then they could, after working on the foundation, get some kind of cushy job working with one of the major corporations, right? And consequently, we have this massive, the largest bureaucracy in the world here in the United States. But you people, I shouldn't say you people, but you people in the UK, you guys have pretty much invented bureaucracy. Well, the Catholic Church really, the Roman Empire really, but isn't this what we're talking about? It's like the Roman Empire 4.0.
I humbly submit that the Chinese beat everybody when it comes to bureaucracy.
That's why I think that everybody with his brother. What do you want?
I remember going to a lecture many years ago with Marshall Salins, who recounted a story that one of the original British ambassadors to China was taking gifts to the emperor, and as the imperial barge was going down the river, getting closer to the Forbidden City, I think that was the location. They didn't know the British ambassador could actually read Chinese, could read Mandarin, and he noticed that it said, "Servants of the Emperor from the UK bringing tribute to the Celestial Highness." And being a very good diplomat, he decided he hadn't noticed that. So, I mean, what's the poison of Britain, John? It's the class system. It always has been. And what is the bureaucracy there to do? Is to serve the class system. If you've been to Oxbridge, then you're bound to have a glittering future, even if you've no talent or brain at all. And you get someone from, say, a mining community in Wales who might be bursting with intelligence, integrity, and art, but he can sod off, because he's not got the right background. No, I mean, I thought when we all went to America, that was the point That was the point. We were trying to escape all that.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, because see, when going back to John Stuart Mill and his book on liberty, he really makes a point that if you want to pursue excellence in culture, it can really only realistically be the fruit of cultural activity if there's liberty. And all you have to do is look at the Industrial Revolution. I was involved with a scientist, and we were able to prove that the heart is not a pump, just from pure terms of structural. That the apex of the heart is like a hinge, and it's far too thin to withstand any pressure function whatsoever. So we look towards what's called peripheral demand, the function of blood within the capillaries, as being a key motive force for the blood, and not the heart itself. The heart is more like a regulator. But anyways, getting that aside, as we're doing all this research and researching, Harvey and his work on the heart and all this, going all the way back to Aristotle, observing the pulsations of the first drop of blood within the embryo of a chicken egg, and how the heart formed itself. It was flowing before there was a vascular system, and then it surrounded itself with a vascular system. So we're going through all these fascinating corridors of understanding, and we started getting into the history of science because you can't avoid it. And we started noticing something that was really a remarkable thing. And that's that the majority of the inventions in the Industrial Revolution were invented by dissenting ministers. Okay, that it wasn't coming from the high church party, although there were a few, but it was coming from the ministers of the rabble, and so consequently, you have to allow things to bubble up, that a society is based on merit, not just on some kind of a quota regarding some kind of structure, superstructure. If you do that, you're just going to dampen human creativity. Somebody's getting moved ahead because of who their father is, rather than because of their ability. And that's just the way the real world lives and breathes.
Oh, what was that movie with David Niven and Raymond Massey, where most of it was on the other side in the spirit world? I mean, Swedenborg would have loved that. I can't remember the name of the movie offhand. And Raymond Massey, who was the character, was the first American to have been shot by a British soldier in the War of Independence. So he was the prosecuting lawyer in the other world against David Niven. And I remember one line from that movie which struck me to the core. You can strike a flint over a wet blanket and it will never flame. And I thought, my God, is that what Americans think of Britain? And the trouble is, they're right. I think what have we paid a price for in Britain? We've got an incredibly stable political system, but that level of stability has come at, I think, an unbelievable and really wrong price. The price is a Chinese standard bureaucracy, which only allows certain things to happen. I mean, there used to be a program, Yes Minister. I don't know if you're acquainted with it. It was a political satire. The original series was absolutely superbly well written and acted. And one of the characters, Sir Humphrey, was one of the mandarins of Whitehall. And, if the mandarins don't want something done, forget it. It doesn't matter whether you're the minister or not. It won't be done. It will be lost in an argument. It will be lost in the committee stage. It will be rewritten to such an extent you won't recognize what it is by the time they've finished. And that is what will go to be voted into law. My eulogizing of America, the USA, is based on the fact that I think the liberal agenda found greater expression over there than sadly it can ever do here for the time being. Liberal with a capital L, liberal libertarianism. I'll tell you something else too, something that terrified me when I read Swedenborg. I haven't worked my way through the whole corpus equally. I mean, he wrote voluminously, but the spirit world, whatever Swedenborg means by that, I mean, you're dealing with a very, very sophisticated mind. And I think it was Kierkegaard who said, are we actually sure we know what Swedenborg is getting at? Which I think is the only very serious voice to say, well, let's be careful here. You know, you're dealing with such a brain. Are we really sure we know what's going on there? But according to Swedenborg, the spirit world, I mean, hardly anybody stays in the spirit world. You generate your own realities to an extent on the other side, and you very quickly go beyond that, either into hell worlds or heaven worlds. But the spirit world was very, very like here. It was very like the earthly world, and it had cities, and it had populations, and it had peoples. And I remember thinking, as I was reading that, and I realized it wasn't meant to be taken entirely literally at the time. You know, and so was that satire? I mean, was that Swedenborg giving God? Is there such a thing as metaphysical satire? But so people haven't escaped because they don't want to. That's what they're getting at. That's what he's getting at, which of course is the British bureaucracy. They don't really want anyone to escape. They just want things to tick over forever in the same sort of way. And what Swedenborg is saying from a very safe Scandinavian distance is, well, you know, maybe that's what everybody really wants, and you have to be very brave to want more than that. But if you do want more than that, then you gain everything. You know, be a bit more experimental, be a bit more gutsy, don't be afraid to use your brain, and maybe we can make this world and every other world a much better place. So for me, not only was Raymond Massey correct in that movie, sadly, and I paraphrased it, yeah, a great performance, so I hope he forgives me wherever he is. But, you know, we're looking at something, we're looking, I suppose, at the human condition being reduced even further by people who simply don't want things to change. They never want things to adapt. They never want things to progress or evolve. And we can't live in a world like that. You know, that's not human. It's not got a heart, and it's certainly not got a brain. So, you know, we have to be more certain and secure in where we are. And forgive me, I mean, when I called you conspiracy theorist earlier, I meant some of the more outrageous work that you do. I mean, I have you down as an organic intellectual in the classic sense of that. You know, some of the work you do is deeply inspiring, and for me, it has a Goethean angle to it. You know, you're looking at things, or even a Gurdjieffian one. I don't know if you've ever looked at Gurdjieff, John. You know, because they used to think, okay, that's what the common scholars are saying, but we want to look ourselves and see what we think. And you know, that was an extraordinary individual, and we need more of that in the world. We need more people to investigate things themselves, not rely on authority, if there is such a thing in academia anymore. And you know, try and make sense of things. This is the human quest. You know, it's looking for real knowledge and real love and real truth and real beauty, not just being told what it is.
Yeah, thanks to one of our observers, that movie was a matter of life and death. The 1946 British fantasy romance film.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Barry, for that. Yeah, so consequently,
thank you.
In dealing with somebody like Swedenborg, don't assume you know what he's talking about because you've read something out of his diary. Remember, a diary is notes for yourself, and so it's just a touchstone for him to maintain a relationship to whatever experience he's recounting. But one of my favorite quotes of Emanuel Swedenborg, the speech of angels exterior and interior. He says, I have been in company with the angels, and it has been granted to become acquainted with their speech by experience. There are 4 kinds of speech, like as there are 4 kinds of angels: a material speech of visible objects, and an interior speech of visual things, which are speeches of the understanding or of the thought. There's a speak of the afflictions of the body, a speech of the afflictions of the heart, which are speeches of the will or of the affection. Some who were able to be in speech of the affections of the body converse with me and express my affections from relating to the body in suitable terms, at which I was astonished that they were able to express in these terms, in perfectly suitable ones, in the exterior and interior affections of the body without exception. They were delightful and charming and conjoined with many affections which were expressed. Certain spirits from a distance heard and understood, but I, being in the natural state, did not hear the words, but I perceived the affections which they uttered in the words. This speech cannot be understood by those who are invisible things only, as they also said. But I was told them that there is also a speech of the heart, which is speech of love to the Lord. These afterwards spoke with the former ones and said that they did not hear, nor were they able to hear the words, but that they perceived the things which they uttered from affection, as I did when the former ones spoke. Regarding the former speech, it was said that it was indeed similar to the speech of visual things, as regards the words which the letters compose, but still that each letter is uttered differently, namely according to the affection. That there is also this difference, that other words are unintelligible. I got somebody sharing with, that are unintelligible to those who are in visual things alone. But the speech of visual things consists in speaking and expressing those things which are seen by the eyes and describing them. And this, according to visual and intellectual ideas, for example, houses, palaces, gardens, men's clothing, and many other things. This speech is both exterior and interior. The exterior is material or sensual, and the interior is natural or intellectual. I afterwards heard spirits conversing with angels of the interior heaven. They said that they heard speech with the ears, yet did not comprehend, because things were of interior wisdom and expressed by their words, inasmuch as they did not understand these. Therefore, neither did they the words. So consequently, you can see that that's something that I'm sure any of you that want to understand what I just shared with you, you're going to have to go back and you're going to have to listen to it a few times. So consequently, it's like what you have is a miraculous mind. You mentioned Gurdjieff, George Ivanovich Gurdjieff. Well, I'm familiar with his work, but I consider him a scoundrel. You know.
Ah, right.
As do I consider Aleister Crowley. They're both scoundrels, and so that they don't appreciate the sanctity of the inviolable nature of the individual human will. And so they were more than willing to trespass on another person's will. So they're on the scoundrel list, although they both had brilliant minds and certain capacities they were able to develop. Nonetheless, I consider them of an unwholesome character.
I confess I tend to come through to Gurdjieff through Ouspensky, who I have a great regard for, you know, a researcher, a mathematician. So I sort of come through that lens. You've actually hit something very interesting there. I've always been uncomfortable with Gurdjieff as a character. You've actually hit something there. And I've never been able to put my finger on why. Whereas I've got a confession to make about Aleister Crowley. I did say to the press many years ago he was a national treasure. What I was referring to was his art. I mean, he's one of the earliest, I think, performance artists in Europe. Therefore, I've never really known where I stood with him. And certainly some of the expressionist paintings he did are exemplary. So that's what I was getting at. I can't remember which newspaper it was. They reported the national treasure bit. They didn't report the rest. So it looked like I was sticking up for this notorious monster.
Landing yourself with the beast. Yes.
I mean,
well, press again, it's interesting because in light of the British, I've on occasion made reference to an observation that the various cultures, European cultures, each have particular gifts that they work with primarily. And so, for example, in Italy, it's opera, without question. And so when you go to France, well, it's ballet. I mean, who's greater at the ballet? Of course, the Russians, they get good at everything because they work hard, and they start you off when you're 6 years old or younger. But then you have German culture with symphonic music, and also in the realm of poetry with Goethe and Schiller and Novalis, and Romanticism was really born in Germany, not in Britain, although the Brits would want to argue that point. And then in Britain, of course, their big contribution is theater and Shakespeare. There is no comparable figure to Shakespeare anywhere. And being that your particular muse functions in that realm, it's very interesting. And Rudolf Steiner made a very interesting point about Shakespeare that really bears understanding. He said that if you read the plays of Shakespeare with the understanding that they were written by an actor, you see that the way in which the plays are constructed, it has to do with accommodating action on stage, and consequently, you'll get certain passages that are undecipherable. I mean, you read it and you go, "My God, what is it? What is this?" Right? And it was kind of a challenge because it was really a prop. It's conversation as prop, and it doesn't really mean much of anything. It's just taking up some time, setting up the context for the next thing that's going to be said, and will have greater impact because what the person just said was just a little bit beyond gibberish, a very, very eloquent gibberish, but rhubarb, as any theater aficionado would know. Well, if you're just standing around and you're supposed to look like you're talking, then just say rhubarb. It looks like you're talking. So that it's basically rhubarb. And, what can I say? Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. You know, it's like it's a beautiful thing, and consequently, that theme within British culture, it seems that they're in danger of setting aside for something far less noble. We're getting towards the end of our broadcast. I did a little puff piece at the beginning for both of our books, but again, if there's anything that you want to say regarding your wonderful contribution to English literature, Mount Athos Inside Me, please go ahead.
Well, firstly, I apologize for having the eternal window behind me, which you probably remember from the pew. I hope to be invited back on your show, and I promise I will do something about the window. I mean, you've said such enormous things, and I think I need to discuss folk souls with you at some point. An incredibly deep idea, which I didn't write about in Athos. And you're completely correct. I mean, the Germans, they're also good at philosophy, aren't they? I mean, this sort of philosophy and engineering. I mean, and this joins in with that. I mean, and the French are good at fashion, and they're good at social sciences.
Yeah.
And I think what goes with drama in this country, this is the seat of the muse, is also history, and that is almost forbidden as a subject in British schools at the minute, for reasons best known to the government, which I find sinister. If there was ever a recipe for people to repeat the mistakes of the past, it's to ban history lessons in schools or make them difficult to ascertain.
Yeah.
I mean, so my humble book, Athos, was to do with, I suppose, a historical perspective in consciousness, and a call to everybody to find the creativity within them. Because, we're children of the cosmos, we're children of the universe. We are creative. We are creative like the creator. So what I tried to do, it grew out of a series of conferences. I was invited by Yaruskis to go to a series of 3 wonderful conferences, one in Salzburg, one in Serbia. I can't remember where exactly. And, discussing Mount Athos as a unique cultural treasure. I mean, it's a place for Orthodox worship, but it's also the longest continuous Christian community, arguably, in the world. Also, it's a center of unique cultural treasures, like it has a unique and voluminous Byzantine script and painting collection, which the monks will tell you to your face, there's no art on Mount Athos. This is for use. This is for worship. But whether the good fathers like it or not, it is art and text at a very high level, and for over a long period. So what I wanted to do was say, look at what human beings are capable of. Don't settle for so little. Don't settle for the trivial. Don't settle for the superficial. In your lives, embrace the great, the beautiful, the good, and the true, because you will benefit, and everyone around you will benefit at the same time. So that was the sort of raison d'etre behind the book. And I hope if anyone is kind enough to buy a copy, that they'll see what I was trying to get at and feel inspired themselves. Write a play, compose some music, paint a picture, take icon painting lessons. Make the world a more creative and beautiful place. Because at the end of the day, beautification is a ladder to higher states of consciousness. And I suppose that's where I want to leave that, John, because otherwise I'm going to go lapse into a sales pitch, which doesn't become a pastor on a Sunday, I think.
Well, I'll do it for you. Anybody that would like to buy David a cup of coffee for his wonderful contributions, you go to paypal.me/DPARRY777. And if you want to buy me a cup of coffee, you can go to paypal.me/John Barnwell888. And also, if you're interested in getting copies of our books, you can go to my YouTube channel and just go down in the text beneath it, and you'll find links to be able to get to my books and David's book. And in case you notice in the title, I listed this as part 1. So I'm planning on roping you in on a continuing basis, because you happen to be one of the more interesting characters that I know of, that I can bounce ideas off of, and has something that is redemptive.
Oh gosh, thank you, John. I miss working with you so much. You're a fine gentleman. You're a good friend to me, and yet haul me in. I missed working with you, and this is a wonderful way to reconnect. No, more power to you, and count me in.
Yeah, okay. And get rid of the window behind you. The light.
I promise.
The light is giving you a false halo.
Oh, not yet. No, what was it Saint Augustine said? Oh, save me, Lord, but not yet. So I promise I'll fix it.
And also, people, you want to make sure to go to aimfortruth.org, where you can get a hold of the cat reports by the conclave, working with Tyla and Douglas Gabriel, my dear friends, and also Americans for Innovation. It's Americans, 4, innovation.blogspot.com, where you can access primary documentation to support all of our assertions regarding the structure of this internationalist cabal. And anyways, it's been such a pleasure, and now I have something to look forward to, perhaps next Sunday. And so
I'm honored. I'm at your service, and I'm honored.
Well, seeing as how you are a reverend, it's probably appropriate we do our thing on Sundays. So good. There it is. Well, David, thank you so much. And everybody else, thank you for chiming in. I have a hard time squinting and reading all the things you say, but I do love going back and checking it out. And so to all of you, I say have a good afternoon, And please click like on this if you're on YouTube. I guess that's supposed to be a good idea. But anyways, take care.
Take care.